Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Taking Plan Design to New Heights. I have just a few announcements for those of you who are requesting credit. Please note that to receive CE credit, you must remain logged into the video portion of the webinar for the entire program. Logging into the audio portion only is not sufficient for CE credit. Continuing education credits are being offered for the following designations: CPE, CIMA, CPWA, CIMC, RMA, CFP, and SHRM. Also, at the end of the webinar, we would like to request that all attendees fill out the evaluation form that will pop up. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the question box. At the end of the webinar, we will answer as many questions as we can, but we want to be respectful of your schedule and end on time. If we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you afterwards. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast. Let's get started. We are joined today by Kate Blake, Senior Learning and Development Manager at Pentegra. Kate develops training programs focused on retirement plan administration, legislative updates, and software applications. She began her career at Pentegra in defined benefit plan administration before moving into consulting services, where she specialized in plan design, plan reviews, and participant education. Kate holds CPC, QPA, QKA credentials for ASPA, along with FINRA Series 6 and 63 licenses, bringing extensive retirement industry expertise into her role. Kate, I will hand things off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today for what promises to be a riveting discussion of plan design. Just kidding. I know plan design is probably not number one on everybody's list of topics they can't wait to discuss, but it is so important. Plan design over the last 10, 20 years has really been de-emphasized for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in just a moment. Today, we want to help you identify strategies to help figure out what are plan sponsor objectives, and then understand how to meet those objectives using plan design. And to do that today, we'll look at 7 different case studies of various plan design options with a variety of different employer demographics. But before we get into our case studies today, let's start out with just the high-level view of the plan design process. And we'll begin with a look at basic goals of plan design. So what are we trying to accomplish when we're deciding what boxes to check in that 40-something page adoption agreement? Well, we want to make sure that the plan achieves business objectives of that organization. We want to make sure we help secure tax advantages for not only the plan sponsor or employer, but also the participants in the plan as well. Maximize contribution opportunities for both of those groups, provide a source of retirement income for our participants, and help the sponsor fulfill its fiduciary responsibility to plan participants. But over the years, like I said, plan design is a lost art. So why? Well, cookie cutter approaches are often easier. You know, dollar for dollar match on the first 6% or 3% of salary is easy. It's common. It's simple to understand. It's simple to administer. So there are some good reasons to go for these basic plan design approaches. Also, a lot of these plan design, more common plan design approaches get a lot of media attention, like Safe Harbor. Many of us know that that's an easy way to get rid of certain testing requirements. But those cookie cutter design approaches and Safe Harbor designs, as useful as they may be for certain scenarios, at times those designs overlook the flexibility of the modern plan document options. And for anybody who's ever taken a gander at an adoption agreement, you know there are many options these days. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can approach plan design and choosing the right plan document for a client. There's the individually designed plan, but that for many clients, is very labor intensive. Often an ERISA attorney needs to be retained. A pre-approved plan, by contrast, that's, as I mentioned, that check the box adoption agreement scenario, these days really can satisfy most plan sponsors' needs and objectives beyond those cookie cutter approaches. Now, a lot of providers today, for good reason, are increasingly margin driven. There's so much competition and fee compression and mergers and acquisitions happening in the industry that, again, for good reason, a lot of practitioners gravitate towards those more simple designs that are less costly to administer and support and more checklist driven with fewer options. As in addition to being more margin driven, we see more technology driven approaches. That's where we see things like checklists come in and streamlining of plan provisions. A lot of times, as we said, these types of plan designs are less work to administer, and as a result, they become the default plan design. But where does that leave us? That leaves us with a lot of retirement plans that look a lot alike. And while some of these plans may be suitable for certain employers, we know there's such a wide array of employers and businesses out there, from large businesses to small businesses to everything in between, professional service firms. And each of these types of organizations have different plan design needs. But because the industry has been going the way it is, what we find is that plan design specialists are kind of hard to find these days. But that is potentially a benefit to you as a retirement service practitioner, because you have an opportunity here to use plan design as a differentiator. This is a way to strengthen a relationship, build new relationships, and find new prospects and clients. When we try to meet employers where they are and find plans that really meet those goals and objectives, it helps us across the board be better practitioners, it helps employers offer better plans, and it helps set up employees more successfully for retirement. But that's a lot of talk. How do we actually get there? It's important to consider the plan design process when you're speaking with prospects, working with clients and reviewing their plans, or maybe reviewing your own retirement plan. So that process has a couple of different steps. Step one, consider your or the plan sponsor's goals and objectives. Step two, pick the appropriate document format. Step three, understand your various options. Step four, choose design options that fulfill the goals and objectives identified in step one. And then step five is so important, we cannot forget about this, which is reevaluate. Now, I'm not saying you have to sleep with an adoption agreement under your pillow at night or, look at the plan at 9 a.m. every Monday, but an annual plan review is an excellent practice with any book of business. That way you can keep the plan document fresh and make sure that you're contemplating any potential new developments in the landscape. For example, a lot of Secure 2.0 voluntary plan provisions are online or coming online now. Periodic reevaluation of plan design allows us to look at those legislative changes and incorporate the ones that work for our clients into their plan design. So let's talk about step one in a little bit more detail, because this is really, in my mind, what plan design hinges on. The plan sponsor's goals and objectives. And they can take a couple of different buckets, as you can see here. And I think this is important because a lot of times if you ask a plan sponsor, well, what are you looking to get out of your retirement plan? They may not necessarily be able to tell you in retirement plan jargon. They may start talking about Betty Sue, who's been employed in the accounting department for 20 years, versus, Bob, the new hire in sales, and how do we, what are they doing? Where are they going in the future? They may tell you stories. about employees. Now, it's our job to take those stories about this person from accounting and that person from sales and translate that into plan design goals. So the stories take a couple of different buckets: contribution and deduction, augmentation, and redirection. In other words, who do you want to benefit under the plan? So if we start talking about the person, like I said, in accounting with 20 years of service who we want to make sure is taken care of, well, that's a data point. Maybe this employer is trying to reward long service employees. Additional contributions and deferral opportunities. Maybe they start telling you about an HCE who got a refund last year and they were a little bit upset about that. Well, maybe that means you need to take a look at deferral rates and testing and plan design around that. But they may not know the terminology. They may not know how do we find a plan design that, means that we don't get refunds. They may just see the HCEs be annoyed. It's up to us to connect those dots. The next one is similar: eliminate compliance test failures and contribution and deferral limitations when, again, we hear about those refunds. Cost containment. The stories that you hear from employers may not be about the participant experience at all. It may be about a surprise contribution or a fee that was required unexpectedly, or a misunderstanding about how perhaps a profit sharing contribution was calculated or how much it's going to cost. They could take the form of recruitment. How do we attract employees to our firm? Or simplification. Maybe you'll hear something like, "Ooh, people really aren't using the plan because they don't understand it." That's a data point as well. In order to help draw this information out of employers, because again, they may not necessarily have the vocabulary, there are some questions that we can ask them. And I always like to jot these down, and you don't have to make it like a rapid fire Q&A session. Make it a discussion. So ideally, what would you like your plan to do? Maybe they talk about some pain point or something they like in their existing plan. You can use that to leverage into the second question. How can we tweak your existing plan in order to meet the needs that you just identified? Then you can zoom in and look at participants. Have any refunds been required to HCEs? At what level are NHCEs contributing? What's the average participation rate in the plan? You could even help employers break it down and look at maybe different age bands or service bands to understand the participant experience. We can ask employers, do we want employees to contribute toward their own retirement at all? Which might seem like a simple question. For many employers, the answer is yes. But for many other employers, the answer might be no. And we see that a lot in the case of employers who are offering cash balance plans. Those are entirely employer funded. Why somebody might want to do that? Well, they have very high contribution levels and can really bolster potential projected benefits for late career employees. And that's all done via employer contributions. Another important one nearing the end of the list: do we want to include or exclude certain groups of employees? Tying back into some of these earlier questions, do we have any compliance testing problems, refunds, coverage problems? And thinking back again to the employee experience, how are they invested in the plan? Is everybody going into the default fund and not making an election? That's another data point, maybe towards simplification of the plan. Or do we find a lot of self-directed investors in the plan who are taking advantage of some features like perhaps periodic rebalancing? That's indicative of a savvy participant base who may benefit from a wide range of investment opportunities. But point being, you can collect a lot of these data points in just a short 20, 30-minute conversation with an employer about what their company's doing, what their employee experience is, and what they're looking to do and accomplish over the long term. Now, when we've identified some of these criteria, then we can think about the document format. Now, for many plans that are already in existence, there's already a document. So this may become a moot point. But for example, for a startup plan, consider the pros and cons and trade-offs of the different options. Again, those individually designed plans allow for incredible amounts of flexibility. But so too are those modern plan documents with adoption agreements with tremendous amount of options. So consider how much work, how much money, and how much time a plan sponsor wants to invest in their plan document, and take that in hand with how much customization an employer might want. But again, just keep in mind, so many of our standard plan documents today can accommodate pretty complex provisions, which is what I'll show you next. But first, we have our first polling question. What's the first step in the plan design process? A, understand design options. B, pick the document format. C, identify the sponsor's goals and objectives. Or D, select design options.
This poll will be available for another few seconds for anyone who has yet to select an answer. The poll is closed. Kate, you may continue.
Great. Thanks so much, Lauren. The answer, of course, is item C. Identify the plan sponsor's goals and objectives before doing anything else. Then let's talk about these various options. So we already know our goal here is to align goals and objectives of the employer with plan provisions, but this requires an understanding of the options that are available and their impact on plan testing. That's key. Broadly speaking, there are two types of compliance tests that need to be satisfied. There's a group or coverage testing, and then there's individual. So we want to make sure that nobody is exceeding the individual IRS limits for contributions that have been set. So that would be that $24,500, for example, on a pre-tax enrolled basis in 2026 for individuals who are not catch-up eligible. And then there's, again, the group testing. So we want to make sure that there is no group that is disproportionately benefited. And I'm thinking particularly of our highly compensated employees. A certain percentage of employees of both groups have to be benefiting in order for the plan to pass testing in certain scenarios. There are some exceptions, though, to those testing rules that we'll talk about when we look at some of these case studies. And some of these exceptions are worth considering if you have any clients who have testing issues, particularly if there are coverage testing failures. Once we determine what those pain points are, whether it's participants who are not very investment or retirement savvy, or maybe it's streamlining and minimizing costs, or maybe it's ensuring that certain groups benefit over others, whatever those goals are. Next, we want to make sure that we match up plan design. Then, reevaluate regularly. We talked about this. I think an annual plan review is an excellent time frame to do this on. Of course, plans can be amended to reflect changes in the plan sponsor's objectives. We're seeing this right now with Secure 2.0 plan provisions, and amending a plan is really not difficult. Just let your provider know. So for example, if you would like to amend any of the plans that you administer with Pentegra, you would let us know. XYZ client would like to amend their plan to provide for such and such a provision. Typically, our legal department will prepare an amendment or a board resolution that needs to be executed along with that. That will be returned to us, and then we'll update the plan documents, including the participant summary plan description. Just keep in mind, generally, amendments are not usually retroactive. So when we amend the plan, it is a forward-looking change. That brings us to polling question number 2. Pre-approved plans are flexible and can satisfy most sponsors' needs and objectives. True or false?
This poll will be available for another few seconds for anyone who has yet to select an answer. The poll is now closed. Kate, you may continue.
Great. The answer is true, especially with regard to things like employer contributions, eligibility, and things like that. Definition of compensation. There's so much flexibility built into plan documents, pre-approved plan documents these days. So now let's take a look at our case studies. Here we have 7 drastically different situations, drastically different employers and plan design needs and goals. Let's take a look at how we can curate our plan design to meet the needs of each one of these individual scenarios. We're going to start out with just sort of a more basic scenario. I mentioned before, a lot of employers and practitioners tend to gravitate towards these simple solutions like, for example, a safe harbor plan. Now, I wanted to include it as a sample profile because while it is a very common, very simple solution, it carries a lot of heft. It solves a very real problem in the industry. So let's talk about this. This employer wants to allow highly compensated employees to defer additional amounts. So this is the problem that the safe harbor plan is solving. Right now, if employees or if non-highly compensated employees do not contribute enough to the plan, then highly compensated folks will be limited in how much they can contribute. This is because of that testing that we mentioned before. A safe harbor plan option, I'm sure most folks on the call are familiar with this. This allows highly compensated employees to make additional deferrals to the plan up to the limit without needing the ADP ACP test. So here's an example here. So we have a situation where, as you can see here with the first 2 non-highly compensated employees, they're contributing nothing. And what is happening is that is limiting the amount that an HCE can contribute. So if an HCE goes over the amount that they're limited, and by the way, the amount can change annually depending on how much these non-highlies are contributing. If they exceed that amount, then they're going to get a refund. And that's where, as we said before, you might hear these stories from plan sponsors. So-and-so called me up annoyed about their refund. That should ping something in your brain. Okay, maybe we need to look at plan design so that HCE contributions aren't limited. One way that we can do that is by providing a safe harbor contribution. Takes a couple of different forms. There's some flexibility in the type of safe harbor contribution that is provided. It could be a matching contribution. It could be a non-elective contribution. And there are pros and cons to both approaches there as well. But bottom line, whichever approach is chosen, in a safe harbor situation, the ADP test is deemed satisfied so that those NHCEs aren't limited. A pro of this is that testing is simplified. Certain tests are deemed satisfied. HCE deferrals are not linked to non-highly compensated deferral percentages. And then top-heavy testing in certain situations is deemed satisfied as well. There are cons, though. I mentioned before that the employer has to make a certain contribution. And again, it's going to be a match or a non-elective. There's an expense to that. And I said there were pros and cons to the options. A match incents people to contribute in a plan, and also it may not cost as much as a non-elective. A non-elective you give to everybody. So if you adopt a safe harbor plan or have a client who adopts such a plan and is giving a non-elective contribution, again, that goes to everybody regardless of whether or not they're contributing. And in larger plans, that can get pretty pricey. So you have to weigh the balance here. How much does your employer want to guarantee that those HCEs can contribute versus how much are they willing to spend? So this is a good solution for the problem, but it's a pricey solution. It also has additional reporting and disclosure requirements, and additional contributions can potentially put a monkey wrench into the testing scenario, specifically talking about after tax. So if you have HCEs who want to go above and beyond that pre-tax unlock limit with after-tax contributions, that could still potentially be an issue even in a safe harbor plan. But it does solve that very real problem that we see with a lot of organizations of HCEs getting refunds. But there's other ways to solve problems as well. What about multiple benefit structures? So here, we can augment contributions for certain employee groups. This encourages retention and it supports recruitment into a company. What we need to do is use a plan document, though, that permits multiple benefit structures, although a lot of, again, our adoption agreement style plan documents do permit that these days. So what we can do here is, let's say maybe we have one department or one group that we specifically want to target. Think back to what we said before about the stories that plan sponsors tell us. The woman in accounting who's been here a long time that we want to reward. Or perhaps maybe there's a group that's not contributing, just to give a different example, that we want to incent to contribute. We could offer them some sort of targeted formula. So here in this example, we've got a lot of turnover in a department. Currently, they've got a 50 cents on a dollar match up to the first 6% of comp that's contributed. But what if we amended the plan for multiple benefit formulas to try to attack this employee turnover situation? What if instead we give this specific group a match equal to 100% up to 10% of comp? It's allowed, but we do have to satisfy coverage and ACP testing. So a pro of this approach is that it targets that specific group. Again, for whatever reason, recruitment and retention, or maybe we want to incent contributions, it allows us to achieve our goals. But what happens here is now we have plan administration that is, in some cases, a lot more complex, depending on how many tiers of benefit structure. You need to test all of those tiers of benefit structure and make sure that no one group is disproportionately benefiting over another. And also, if you are offering, for example, an increased contribution to one group over another, just like with the safe harbor required contribution, there's a cost impact to that, higher costs on account of any increased contributions that you're offering to any specific groups. I like this approach for clients who have a defined need with a specific group and low turnover. If you have a lot of turnover, and that's the problem that this solution is trying to solve, it could potentially make your testing wonky from year to year if the different groups have drastically different populations each year. But hopefully, this approach will achieve the goal of minimizing turnover for this group by using this contribution to function as a retention tool, thus minimizing the potential issue associated with testing and demographic changes. So this is an approach. It's one I like for certain groups, but I would say just be careful. If you're considering this, think about your demographics and turnover and reach out to your vendor. Organizations like Pentegra and TPA firms have the ability to perform calculations to see what these contributions might look like over time and with different employee demographics. That way you can ensure you're not potentially running into trouble downstream before making any changes to your plan document. Then we have a profile number 3. So here we're excluding a specific group of non-highly compensated employees. So in profile number 2, we were giving them different levels of benefit. Here, we're taking a group of NHCEs out of the plan entirely. Why would we do that? Well, this is another way of circling around to the same problem. As you can see here, taking NHCEs out of the plan, or non-highly comp people, would allow HCEs to make additional deferrals by improving ADP ACP testing results. In other words, what's happening here translated into English, if you take a group of NHCEs out of the plan, maybe ones who aren't contributing or aren't contributing a lot, well, then you're not going to have that group weighing down your calculation. What that also does is it reduces plan costs. Let's take a look at an example here. So we have a particular group, shipping department employees. They have pretty low deferral rates. The NHCE ADP is 2%. They're not really contributing a lot. And as a result, that limits the HCE ADP to 4%. What we could do is exclude this group of shipping department employees that are kind of causing this limit here. What would happen here in this particular example is this would increase the NHCE ADP from 2% to 5%. In other words, the average amount that they're contributing, the average deferral percentage, goes up. What happens here is that as long as we can ensure that coverage testing is passed, this would allow HCEs to contribute up to 7%. So there's some testing implications here, though. We can't just be taking groups of people out of a plan willy-nilly. So let me put some numbers to this. Let's say there are 2 HCEs in this plan, and they're both contributing. So 100% of the HCE population is covered. Let's say, I'm just going to use round numbers here. Let's say there's 100 non-highly compensated employees. And let's say this shipping department with the low deferral rates, let's say there's 25 people in that group, and we pull them out of the plan. Instead of 100 NHCEs, we now have 75 NHCEs covered, with 25 NHCEs excluded. What that means is that this plan will pass the ratio percentage test because they have an NHCE coverage percentage of 75%. They need at least 70% coverage in order to pass the ratio percentage test. So you can see why you need to look at plan design. So like, let me give you another example. If there were 35 NHCEs in that shipping department, would that be an issue? Yeah, potentially, because now we wouldn't pass the coverage test and we'd have to move on to the average benefits test and try to pass that. So this is another scenario where you can potentially save money, increase the amount that highly compensated employees can contribute to the plan, but it comes with downsides. Here, the downside could be potential testing issues, and it could also be, as you can see in the cons area here, dissatisfaction within that excluded group. If I was one of those excluded employees, well, I already wasn't doing very well with my retirement plan readiness to begin with, and now all of a sudden I've been kicked out of this plan and I can't save at all. So there may be some optics issues, some PR, some HR issues associated with excluding groups from participation. But again, it all depends on, thinking back to step 1, what are the goals of the employer? What groups do they want to benefit the most? And, you know, again, if I am an employer and, you know, I want to, for example, save money, this is potentially a good way to do it. All right, this brings us to our next polling question. Which of the following is true regarding a safe harbor 401k plan? A, safe harbor design plans allow HCEs to maximize deferrals. B, the ADP test is deemed to be satisfied. C, employer contributions are required. D, all of the above. Or E, A and B only.
This poll will be available for another few seconds for anyone who has yet to select an answer. This poll is now closed. Kate, you may continue.
Great. The answer is all of the above. So it allows employee or HCEs to maximize deferrals. The ADP test is deemed satisfied, and employer contributions are required. That's sort of the stipulation of those other benefits. Okay. So in the prior example, we excluded a specific group of non-highly compensated employees. In this example, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to exclude highly compensated employees. So what this accomplishes is it could reduce costs for a plan through, again, exclusion of a specific group, and excluding certain highly compensated allows potentially additional exclusions of certain non-highly compensated employees. So here, we're really concerned with cost. The plan is really expensive. We've got 5 HCEs in total, and we've got a bunch of support staff here. It's expensive to give benefits to all of these people, especially the HCEs. What a plan sponsor could do is they could amend the plan to exclude a specific group of HCEs. So in this case, we're going to take out the associate HCEs, the 3 of them. When we do that, that also opens us up for additional exclusions. Here we can exclude 10 admins and 10 investigators from the plan because of the calculation that goes into the coverage testing. So here, if we exclude these 3 HCE associates, our HCE coverage is only 40%. It's just the 2 out of the 5. What that means is that only 28% of the non-highly compensated employees need to be covered. 40 times the 70% for the ratio percentage test, that's how we get that 28% of NHCEs that need to be covered. When we just cover the 6 paralegals, that clears that bar. So if we just need to cover 28% of our NHCEs, well, 6 out of our 20 NHCEs gives us 30% of the NHCE staff that is covered, which means we would pass testing and we'd be able to exclude 14 NHCEs and 3 HCEs while still passing testing and reducing costs at the same time. So this is a different type of situation. Here, maybe this is an employer who is facing tough times. Maybe they are needing to cut costs for some reason. This would allow an employer to accomplish this goal while still keeping that plan running and still benefiting certain employees. Objectives are met, costs are reduced, but all those percentages and numbers that I just rattled off that allowed for that to happen, well, that's very complex compliance testing. And again, that's something that can change from year to year as the demographics of the plan change. So important to keep your eyes on plan demographics if you are considering excluding certain groups. And again, just like we said before with the exclusion of the NHCEs, we can see dissatisfaction within this excluded group as well. Profile number 5. Here, we're going to take even more of a drastic step. We're going to just exclude all highly compensated employees. Why would we do this? Well, this allows NHCEs to receive potentially additional matching contributions. It simplifies compliance testing. And let me give you an example here of how this can work. So here, let's say we have 10 highly compensated people, and we have 50 non-highly comped managers, 150 non-highly comped assistant managers, and then 700 others. So this is a huge plan with hundreds of people and 10 HCEs. The plan, what we could do is we could exclude all highly compensated employees, and we could give a tiered match to these other groups. Why would we do this? If we didn't exclude these HCEs, we'd have to do plan testing, and we might fail testing if we were giving these different groups different benefits. So this is for the type of employer who maybe wants to benefit the rank and files, but maybe wants to benefit the rank and files in such a way as to reward longevity and growth with an organization. Because what you can see here is the managers get 100% match up to 10%, assistant managers get a 50% match up to 10%, and then everybody else, the 700 other NHCEs, get a 25% match up to 10%. I'm not looking at the details of the numbers right now, but my gut tells me with 700 NHCEs getting 25% of the first 10%, this might not pass testing. So that's why if we exclude all HCEs, it renders that problem moot and allows us to achieve this plan design objective. Now, we don't have to forget about HCEs entirely. We can put them in a non-qualified plan. However, a non-qualified plan doesn't have all of the same protections necessarily that a qualified plan has. And there are different rules around distributions of benefits. So there could be some dissatisfaction among the HCEs being in a non-qualified plan. There could also be dissatisfaction among non-highly compensated employees with those different matching contribution rates. And from an employer deduction perspective, we lose that immediate tax deduction for the contributions associated with HCEs because it's going into a non-qualified plan, so it doesn't have those same tax benefits. But the benefit here, again, you're rewarding those specific NHCEs who are growing and developing with a company, which in a company with hundreds of employees, maybe you do want to promote that internal employee group or growth. Very different from the examples earlier we looked at where we're kicking NHCEs out of a plan because we want to benefit our highly compensated people, which again ties back to that step 1. What is the employer looking to do in each of our specific client situations? The answers could be very different, and those different answers result in very different approaches. Here, we're trying to benefit those rank and files and develop and reward those employees over time. All right, let's take a look now at profile number 6. So here, maybe we have some people who want to go above and beyond the standard limits, that's the 24,500 this year. Maybe we have highly compensated employees who are not Roth IRA eligible outside of the plan, and they're interested in Roth and want to boost up those assets. Those are reasons to consider allowing after-tax contributions in a plan coupled together with in-service distribution flexibility. Let's talk about it. This plan has one highly compensated person and one non-highly compensated person. It has a 3% safe harbor contribution, and the HCE in the plan earns too much to make a regular Roth IRA contribution outside of the plan. Now, it's possible that maybe the plan allows for Roth contributions up to the annual limit. So this one HCE can make some Roth contributions, but again, they're not eligible for a Roth IRA outside the plan. And maybe now they're making a little bit more money. Now they want to start supercharging their retirement savings. Well, they can do that by making after-tax contributions to a qualified 401k plan. And then what an HCE could do is request an in-service distribution and convert that to a Roth IRA. You all know this colloquially as the mega backdoor Roth. Now, this is not a perfect solution. It could potentially allow employees, HCEs specifically, or really anybody who wanted to, but typically it's HCEs who avail themselves of this opportunity to contribute big bucks into qualified plans, which can then be moved into a Roth IRA. But the catch is, the plan must satisfy the the ACP test. So it works in this situation because you have one HCE and one NHCE. But if you have, for example, 5 HCEs and 3 NHCEs, and all 5 HCEs want to contribute after tax up to the annual additions limit, the solution's probably not going to work. So again, it's important to consider your plan demographics. But this is potentially an opportunity to save big bucks for those who so choose. I'll just give you one quick example because it says $20,000 here, but let me explain how the framework works. It ties in with the annual additions limit, which this year is $72,000. The annual additions limit basically says across all sources, all money that comes into the plan, this is the max that you can put into your account in a given year, or this year, $72,000. Then we have the pre-tax and Roth limit, which is $24,500 this year. Let's assume, just for ease of math, that in this example, the person we're talking about is not catch-up eligible. The amount that they can do in after tax is the difference between that annual additions limit and how much has been contributed. So let's say they contribute up to the max on a pre-tax basis up to $24,500. Let's say maybe they get an extra 10 grand in employer contribution. That's a total contribution in 1 year of $34,500. But if the annual additions limit is $72,000, the difference between those numbers, that space between, that's what they could contribute on an after-tax basis, which in this example would be $37,500. So when I say big bucks, I mean big bucks. This is helpful for perhaps an HCE who has spent a lifetime building a career at perhaps a lower salary level and now finally is making more money closer to retirement and wants to make sure they're ready. There are, as with all the other scenarios, pros and cons here too. The HCE can make significant after-tax contributions to a plan. They can be distributed and converted to a Roth IRA. Assuming the plan is set up for that, is important to look at plan design. But potentially, additional contributions for NHCEs might be required because we have to pass the ACP test. And plan administration is more complex because now we're tracking an additional source of contributions. But I love this option for plans where the demographics work out, for people who really want to turbocharge those retirement savings. This brings us to our next polling question. Which plan design option allows employees, or HCEs I should say, to defer more into the plan without testing? A safe harbor plan, B, a plan with employer contributions, C, a plan that allows for in-service distributions, or D, a plan with matching contributions.
This poll will be available for another few seconds for anyone who has yet to select an answer. This poll is now closed. Kate, you may continue.
Great. A safe harbor plan. That's the one that allows HCEs to defer more into the plan without requiring certain tests. Then we have our last profile, number 7. This is another one I love for maybe a small business, a professional service firm, the type of employer who, as I mentioned with the last example, has spent a lifetime building a career and now maybe later in their career is ready to save more. I'm thinking of the dentists, the doctors, the engineers, the architects, the attorneys of the world. You know who you are. A combo plan is a great potential solution for that scenario. That's where we have a 401k and a cash balance plan. This allows people to maximize tax-advantaged retirement contributions between two plans using something called cross-testing. So let's say here we have 2 partners in a dental practice, 5 hygienists, 1 administrator, and we've got a 401k plan, but the partners are maxed. They can't contribute anymore. And maybe there's a profit sharing contribution as well that's pretty significant in the 401k, but still, maybe now these partners really want to turbocharge these savings above and beyond the defined contribution limits. New comparability formulas favor this. Why? Because in the testing, they allow you to look at projected benefits. And what you can do is add significant benefits to certain people, for example, the partners in this scenario, well above and beyond the 401k limits. In this case, we could add $445,000 a year in contributions for the dentist to the cash balance plan and $32,000 for everybody else. Why? Because again, that new comparability formula. With younger employees, we're projecting these contributions out to retirement. So 401k contributions compounded over a lifetime become significantly more valuable. Conversely, if you are an older employee who is just now starting to turbocharge your retirement savings, it takes a bigger contribution today in present value terms to achieve the same projected benefit as it would for that younger participant. That's the mechanics behind the scenes that allows for lower participants or lower contributions to certain participants and higher to others in these cash balance style combo plan approaches. This allows for partner contributions to be maximized, employee costs to be controlled. It also allows for significant tax leverage because the cash balance plans contributions are deductible, and significant savings acceleration. And because of the deductibility of those DB contributions, it can also have the benefit of reducing taxes for an organization today. So again, this is a solution that really can benefit specific partners with drastically higher contributions than you would see in a DC style plan, while at the same time controlling costs for everybody else. We didn't really see that in some of the other examples where if we want to give more to some people, you know, maybe we've got to do more for others. Here, because of the cross-testing approach, we don't have that same problem. And it provides a valuable retirement benefit for all, which again is different from some of those other scenarios where in some cases we had to take people out of the plan altogether to achieve our goals. But, and this is a big but, a cash balance plan is a DB plan, a defined benefit plan, and what that means is that it has mandatory annual contributions. So I would never recommend this to an employer. We mentioned an example before. Maybe they've got a cash crunch or variable profitability from year to year. I wouldn't use this approach because of those mandatory annual contributions. Maybe I would look at one of the other approaches, excluding certain groups of employees or something like that, if I had variable cash flow. This is for a cash-rich organization. It's also very dependent on employee census. I see this a lot at smaller firms, like the example that we used here was a dental practice. A lot of times this may have, 20 employees or less. In these small plans, even small demographic changes of 1 to 2 employees can have large impacts on the required annual contributions. So again, just be sure this is for cash-rich organizations looking to maximize benefits. But that said, you can see here over the last hour, we talked about safe harbor plans. We talked about multiple benefit structures for everybody. We talked about excluding certain groups of non-highly compensated. We talked about the opposite, excluding certain groups of highly compensated to benefit our non-highlies. We talked about excluding all highlies, which would allow us to give tiered benefit formulas to our other employees. Again, useful when we have maybe large groups that we want to benefit and retain. We talked about after-tax contributions to benefit those highlies and get those contribution amounts up. And then our final case study of our combo plan scenario. But what you can see, the one thread that runs through all of this is that they're all trying to target a different employer need. So coming right back to that step one, what is the employer looking for? That question carries its weight in gold because it is going to drive you towards the appropriate solution. That said, I think I'm just about at my hour here. So Lauren, I'll pass it back over to you. Did any questions come into the chat box?
Yes, Kate, thank you for an excellent presentation. We did receive a question here that is, how often should we review our plan provisions?
Oh, that's a great question. And I sort of alluded to it before, but I think annually is a good practice. If you do it any more frequent than that, I think it tends to kind of just go in one ear and out the other. If you do any sort of an annual client meeting, I find that that's a good time to do it. Usually what I tend to do is I have a summary of plan provisions and I just update it from year to year if an employer makes any changes, and I usually just stick it in my notebook and bring it with me to my meetings.
Wonderful, and we have time for one more. What is the most popular plan design structure, and has it changed over time?
Oh, that is a really interesting one. So I think the most common plan design structure is probably just a very basic employee match formula these days. I see a dollar for dollar on the first 3% of contributions, 50 cents on the dollar on the first 6% of contributions. But what I have seen over the last, I would say, maybe 5-10 years or so is a renewed interest in the combo plan landscape. DB plans really fell out of favor as we saw interest rates start to change and costs go up. Traditional DB plans became really expensive. But over the last, I would say, 5-10 years, we've seen a lot of employers start to explore cash balance plans because they kind of give the best of both worlds. They're a little less expensive than those traditional, more old school style plans, but they also really allow for a lot of turbocharging of benefits. So I would say the combo plan scenario is one that we've seen a lot of interest in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone who has attended today's webinar. Any questions that we did not get to today, we will follow up with you separately. As a reminder, please complete the survey questions that will pop up on your screen in just a minute, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.